But these were trifles as compared to all that was lavished on Stephanie herself. The emperor himself inspected her trousseau and passed her dresses in review, notably such items as a long tulle robe, embroidered in gold and precious stones, the price of which was 2,400 francs, and 12 dresses furnished by Lenormand at prices varying between 1,900 and 1,200 francs. He further presented her with 45,178 francs worth of millinery and knickknacks from Leroy's, and with 2,574 francs worth of artificial flowers from Rue Montigny. He gave her a dowry of 1,500,000 francs, a magnificent parure of diamonds, a quantity of jewels, and 1,000 louis from his privy purse as pocket money. The marriage itself, more especially the religious ceremony, was celebrated with the utmost pomp. All the resources of imperial processions and sovereign splendors added haste and luster to its solemnity. Napoleon could have done no more for a daughter of his own. The festivities were not confined to the palace. They overflowed into the town, which was illuminated by the blaze of fireworks in the Place de la Concorde. But when the last sparks were extinguished, when the last notes of music had died away, and the emperor and empress had conducted the bridal pair to their apartments, according to ancient custom, Stephanie absolutely declined to admit her husband to her room. She wept and sobbed and insisted that her school friend, Mademoiselle Nellie Bourjoli, should be allowed to spend the night with her. The court removed to Malmaison on the following day. At night, the same scene was enacted. Someone suggested to the Prince of Baden that it was the manner in which his hair was dressed which inspired the princess's repugnance, and that she had a great dislike to a queue. The prince at once had his hair cut short and curled in classic fashion all over his head, but when he appeared in this guise, Stephanie burst into a peal of laughter, declaring that he was even uglier than before. Every evening the prince presented himself with fruitless entreaties and supplications, falling asleep at last in an armchair, utterly wearied out. In the morning he carried his complaints to the empress, and Napoleon watched the progress of the comedy with secret amusement. It soon became the talk of the household. The magnificent fete given by the emperor at the Tuileries in honor of the marriage seemed to prove conclusively that he took a certain malicious pleasure in the situation, and showed no signs of anger against Stephanie. Not only the entire court, but all the town was invited to the first great ball, at which 2,500 guests were present. Such sights had never been seen as the two quadrilles, led by the Princess Louise and the Princess Caroline, one in the Galerie de Diane, the other in the Salle de Maréchal, or the sideboards, loaded with 100 large joints, 60 entrees, 60 roasts, 200 entremets, at which 1,000 bottles of bone, 100 of champagne, 100 of claret, 100 of various dessert wines were consumed. At last the question became one of policy, and Napoleon made up his mind to intervene. Mademoiselle de Beauharnais' coquetries had amused him, and he had taken a certain pleasure in teasing his wife. He had gone somewhat further than he intended in the disproportionate rank he had bestowed on the young girl, and the splendor with which he had celebrated her marriage, but he saw that the Prince of Baden was losing patience. A war with Prussia was imminent, and it was highly important to conciliate all such of the German princes as might become allies, or at least furnish information, added to which he was anxious to put an end to a flirtation ill-suited to his dignity, his age, and his temperament. He had respected Stephanie before her marriage, and had no intention of burdening himself with a mistress in the person of a hereditary princess whose head was already turned to a considerable extent by her elevation. She was becoming a nuisance in Paris, whereas at Karlsruhe she might be made useful, if only to counterbalance the influence of the Margrave Louis and the hostility of the whole petty court to France. Napoleon barely allowed himself time to inquire into some story of intercepted letters which showed what opposition awaited his adopted daughter. Before seeking any satisfaction, he hurried on the departure of the prince and princess. Stephanie went off in despair, though accompanied by 3 of her school friends, Mademoiselle de Marcal, Mademoiselle Bourjoli, and Mademoiselle Grau. Immediately On her arrival in her father-in-law's dominions, she addressed the following letter to the emperor. Sire, whenever I have a moment to myself, I think of you, of the empress, of all that is most dear to me. I imagine myself in France once more. I dream that I'm with you, and I even find a certain mournful pleasure in dwelling on my sorrow. Napoleon's answer is marked by a certain severity. His tone is admonitory, but he refrains from any parental formula or tender expression. Karlsruhe is a lovely spot. Do your best to please the elector. He's your father. Love your husband. His attachment to you deserves such a recompense. When she wrote again to say that she was happy in Karlsruhe, he unbent and wrote to her as his daughter, but continued to lay down rules of conduct with a certain commanding austerity. He did not resume his tone of familiar affection until the Grand Duke offered him his support in the forthcoming campaign, and at the same time announced that Stephanie was about to become a mother. I hear nothing but good news of you, he wrote. Be good and gentle to everyone, as you have shown yourself hitherto. And he gave her leave to join the Empress in Hortense at Mayence, while her husband was with the army. In subsequent letters to Josephine, Napoleon rarely omitted some mention of Stephanie, but these were mere passing remembrances, and had no deeper meaning here than in any other case. In 1807, Stephanie and her husband were invited to the fetes given in honor of Jerome's marriage with Catherine of Württemberg, and Stephanie joyfully hailed the opportunity of revisiting Paris. Great must have been her chagrin if she had retained any illusions as to her power over Napoleon's heart. The prestige conferred by her adoption into his family and the position he had assigned her only a year before, now her place was last among the princesses. She seemed to be admitted into the imperial circle on sufferance rather than by right. She was recognized only as one of the princesses of the Germanic Confederation, and had any German queens been present, they would have taken precedence of her. In the imperial presence, she was allowed a folding stool as a favor, whereas the other princesses of the family had a right to chairs. She seems to have hardly realized the change in her circumstances at first, and was absorbed in a flirtation with Jerome, the new king of Westphalia, but her aunt undertook to put the matter plainly before her. She soon perceived that her position was only to be consolidated by means of her husband's affection, and she made him so desperately in love with her that his jealousy became unbearable. His devotion stood her in good stead, however, in 1814, when he defended her against the combined attack of all his kindred. After the fall of the emperor, an attempt was made to oust her from the house of Zähringen. Her presence was a perpetual reminder of broken faith and forgotten benefits, and the ducal family eagerly demanded her repudiation by her husband. Was there any direct connection between his resistance and the mysterious illness by which he, a robust man at 32, in vigorous health, was suddenly attacked? He lingered for a year and died in strange agonies in 1818. Among all the children born to her, Stephanie had never succeeded in rearing a son. When she lost her second, or at least supposed him to be dead, her despair found utterance in the following letter to the emperor. I was so happy to tell your majesty that I had a son, and to implore your love and protection on his behalf. A son would have made me forget many of my sorrows, and was most essential to me in my position, the duties of which are often very difficult. But I have been forced to relinquish all my hopes. She mourned unspeakably over the fatality which seemed to single out her sons and spare her daughters, branding her race with political sterility and cutting it off from the succession. 10 years after the death of the Grand Duke, between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening of May 26, 1828, a citizen in Nuremberg discovered in the tallow market of that city a youth about 17 years of age, who had never stood upon his feet or seen the sunlight, and whose stomach would not digest any animal food, a being whose organs could only have been thus atrophied by imprisonment in darkness from his birth. Stephanie was the first to calculate, reason, and compare dates. She became convinced that the mysterious unknown who went by the name of Caspar Hauser was her son, for whom a dead child had been substituted, her son, the victim of the Margrave Louis's hatred and the Countess of Hochberg's ambition, who had expiated the crime of having a Napoleon for his mother by 16 years of darkness and suffering. But Stephanie was powerless. Her enemies had triumphed. One was on the throne, the other raised to unexpected honors, had secured the succession for a family that courtesy might call morganatic, but which truth can only describe as bastard. Stephanie could but tremble for Caspar Hauser and weep for him when he was at last murdered after 3 unsuccessful attempts on his life. Was her conviction a pathetic illusion born of a mother's grief, or one of those mysterious intuitions which have thrown more light on certain great crimes than all the machinery of law and justice? To her last hour, she died January 29th, 1816. She declared to the small French circle who visited her dilapidated palace at Mannheim that her son had not died in 1812, but had been stolen from her. She named the principals and accessories of the crime and detailed her suppositions and conjectures. Certain German writers have endeavored to show that she was the victim of a delusion. If so, we may congratulate the reigning family of Baden. Chapter 8. Eleanor. Josephine had comparatively little cause for anxiety so long as Napoleon was in doubt as to the possibility of his ever becoming a father. A concatenation of circumstances which should convince him absolutely of this possibility was in the highest degree improbable. It was nevertheless brought about in the most unexpected manner, the revelation being the result of an adventure to which the emperor attached very little importance, and from which a momentous sequel could never have been predicted. Mention has already been made of the school established at Saint-Germain-en-Laye towards the close of the Revolution by Madame Campan, formerly lady-in-waiting to Marie Antoinette. Josephine had taken it under her special protection from the first. Her daughter Hortense, her nieces and cousins Emily and Stephanie de Beauharnais, Stephanie Tascher, Félicité de Father was her sister-in-law, Caroline Bonaparte, and even Lucien's daughter Charlotte, had all been confided to Madame Campan at her instance. The daughters of most of those who had a desire to have some footing on the consular court soon clustered round these more notable pupils. Among the satellites were Mademoiselles Barbé, Marmois, Leclerc, Victor, Clark, and MacDonald. After the successful marriage made by Mademoiselle Auguier, Madame Campan's nieces, as a result of their intimacy with Hortense, many were the applicants for admission to Madame Campan's fold. Even among the families of small means and smaller pretensions, Madame Campan was supposed to be a power at court. She had obtained a reversal of the decrees against many emigres and restitution of their confiscated estates. In short, it became the fashion to be educated by her, and side by side with the glorious but brand new names of many of her pupils, her registers make mention of Noailles, Talon, Lally Tollandels, and Rochemonts, of many representatives of the financial world, and finally of a swarm of nobodies. There was one girl in particular of whose origin the mistress would have been puzzled to give an account had she kept up the standard of exclusiveness she had at first adopted, but the prestige of her establishment having suffered some eclipse after the consulate, she was reduced to filling a vacancies without too close a scrutiny of her candidate's claims. The young lady in question was Mademoiselle Louise Catherine Eleanor Danuel de la Plagne. Her father, who gave himself out to be a gentleman of independent means, was given to speculations, not invariably of a successful nature. Her mother, still a very pretty woman, had figured in a variety of scandalous stories. The pair lodged in sumptuous apartments in the Boulevard des Italiens, where they entertained a numerous and very mixed company. They lived from hand to mouth on the dubious profits of the one or the other, looking forward to the time when their daughter, who was 17 in 1804, she was born September 13th, 1787, should have found a rich husband, or at any rate should be fairly launched on the quest. But time passed on. The lady began to grow old. The gentleman was deeply in debt. The admirers fell off. The quarterly payments were not easily scraped together for Madame Campan, and the parents began to realize the chances of marriages like those of Madame Ney and Madame Savary had been reduced to a minimum since the Beauharnais had left the school in default of the drawing rooms from which she was excluded. Madame Danuel determined to show off her daughter's charms in the theaters. One evening, a good-looking officer entered the box they occupied and took the vacant place behind them. The two ladies showed no signs of austerity. The officer was enterprising, and the trio soon became acquainted. He whispered of love, and the pair discoursed of marriage. No alternative presenting itself, he agreed to the conditions.